Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Sanhedrin Samach Sanhedrin 68. Today's Daf Yomi is going to start on top of 68a. It's dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the Seis Tzara. That we had said in the Mishnah on Samach Zayin, Ahmad Aleph at the bottom, that Rabbi Akiva said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua that sometimes two people will pick a cucumber through magical methods. One of them will gather it up, will be exempt, and the other will gather it up and be liable. So the one who uses magic is liable, but the one who just uses an illusion and just sleight of hand, he's going to be exempt. So the Gemara says on the top of 68a, Rabbi Akiva mi Rabbi Yoshua Gomer, did Rabbi Akiva really learn this out from Rabbi Yoshua? Rabbi Akiva mi Rabbi Yoshua Gomer, Tanya. Now the Gemara is going to tell us a story. Now remember, a famous story called the Tanur of Achnai on 59b in Bamitzia. The Rabbi Eliezer argued with the rabbis and Rabbi Yoshua about the oven of Achnai, if it was considered Tamei or if it was Tahor, this special oven. And Rabbi Eliezer had said it was Tamei, and the rabbi said it was Tahor. And so they argued, and in the end, Rabbi Eliezer tried to prove from different methods, even from heaven, that he was correct. But in the end, Rabbi Eliezer was excommunicated by the rabbis because they said that Torah is not in heaven. So he was excommunicated now until his deathbed. So he became very sick. And Nichnasu Rabbi Akiva v'chaver of Levakos. Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues came in to visit him. Hu Yoshev b'kinov shelo, v'hen Yoshev b'trakon shelo. So Rabbi Eliezer was sitting in his bed, his canopy, and they were sitting in the room outside of it. That day was Erev Shabbos. And V'nichnas Horkinus beno l'chotz tefillah. So Rabbi Eliezer was wearing his tefillin, and Horkinus, his son, came in to remove his tefillin because he didn't want him to carry it on Shabbos. Now, if you wear tefillin on Shabbos and you go out into public domain, it's like you're carrying. So Garbo, so Rabbi Eliezer rebuked him, Yatzim and Zifa, and Horkinus' son left upset. Amar lehen l'chaverov, he said to Rabbi Eliezer's colleagues, Kim dumani shadaitu shel abba nitrafa. Seems to me that my father's all confused. Because he's not letting me take off his tefillin on Erev Shabbos. And all of a sudden, Rebbe Eliezer pipes up, no, my son is confused, and his mother is confused. They have to, why are they abandoning what's a prohibition liable for stoning and dealing with a rabbinic prohibition? Meaning they're removing my tefillin, otherwise I'll be in violation of a rabbinic prohibition on Shabbos. But if they don't do what they're supposed to do, that's a stoning prohibition. They have to properly prepare the food before Shabbos, and they also have to light the candles for Shabbos and in advance. Otherwise, it's a stoning prohibition. So they're the ones who are wrong. So Kimin Shiro Chachamim Shadatum Yeshevas Alav. So since the sages saw that he was totally with it, they came and they sat in front of him, but at a distance of 4 amos away, because he was still excommunicated. Amar Lei, he says to them, Amar Lehem, Lama Batem, why'd you come? So Amar Lo, they said to him, Lamod Torah Banu, we came to study Torah from you. Amar Lo, Lahem, V'ad Achshav Lama Batem, why didn't you come until now? Amar Lo, they said to him, Lo Ayolanu Pnai, we didn't have time. Amar Lehem, so he said, to me, Ani Im Yamusum Nisas Atzman. He said, I'll be shocked if you die by yourselves, meaning to say you're going to be killed, you're going to be murdered by the persecution forces. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva Shalima, what will be my position? Amar lo, so Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkin said, Shalcha, your position for you, it'll be the worst. Shalcha kasha mishalhen. Your situation will end up even worse than everybody else. Natal strays osav v'hinichan olibo. He took his arms and he put them on his chest. And Amar oilochem shtei zrosai. Woe to my 2 arms. Shehin kishtei sifrei Torah. They're like 2 Torah scrolls, Sheniglo and Harbe Torah, Sheniglo, and that are rolled up and nobody could appreciate them. Harbe Torah limadati, Harbe Torah limadati. I studied a lot of Torah and I taught a lot of Torah. Harbe Torah limadati, I studied a lot of Torah. I studied a lot of Torah, but in the end I did not diminish from my teachers even the amount that a dog laps up from the sea, meaning to say I diminished nothing. Harbe Torah limadati, I studied a lot of Torah, Lo chesruni Talmidai ela kemachol b'shafoferes, and the only thing I was missing was like a was like I taught a lot of Torah to my students, and the only way I diminished them, the only thing I basically taught to them was like if you stick a spoon in a container of eyeliner, basically just the amount that you apply to whatever you dip in. Basically, I basically taught another thing. Well, not only that, I know myself 300 teachings about Baharas Aza, a clear Baharas, meaning Tsaras, and nobody even ever asked me anything about it. Chutz mi Akiva, and not only that, the Amri Lash, I skipped V'lo Ela Shani Shoneh Shalosh Meos Halachos, Amri Shalosh Halafim Halachos Benetios Keshuin. I know 300 laws, and some say 3,000 laws about the laws of magic and squash. Adam Shalani Ben Davar Me'olam, and nobody ever asked me about them. Chutz mi Akiva ben Yosef, except for Akiva ben Yosef. So that's the question. Why did Rabbi Akiva stay learned it from Rabbi Yoshua when he really learned it from Rabbi Eliezer? But we continue with this story. One time, Rabbi Akiva and I were walking along the road, and Amarli, and he said to me, Rabbi Lamdani ben Itiwas Kishun. He said, teach me about the planting of squash. Amarti Davar Echad, I said one thing, and it Meli Kol Asada Kishuin. The whole field was filled with squash. Now you see why another reason why they didn't trust him in the story of Achnai. He was a magician. So maybe that's why they didn't trust him. Amarli, so then Amarti Davar Echad. So he said, Lamdini Akiras, and you taught me how to how to plant them. Now teach me how to harvest them. Amarti Davar Echad, and Kapsu Kul and Machal Echad. Said another thing, and they all were collected in one place. Amrlo, they said to him, so that's the story. So then they said to him, they asked him some questions. Hakador v'amos v'kamiyah v'tzura margolis v'mashkolis kitanu mahu. What's the law with all these things? Can they become tamei, even though they don't have they originally had a receptacle, but now they're filled up? So the question is, what's the law of tumah with respect to them? So Amrlan hein tmein u'tarasa b'mashahen. He said they themselves are tamei, but everything inside them is considered tahor. And then he said, Minal shal gabi amos mahu. What about the form on top of a shoe, like they had a mold to make shoes? Amar and Hutar. So he said to them, he said the shoe is the Minal shal gabi amos mahu. Amar and Hutar. He said that itself is going to be tahor. So the yatsa nishmasa b'tahara. So he ended his status with tahara. He ended with tahor. The reason why they asked him about these questions is because they wanted to see if he changed his mind about this. He had been arguing with the rabbis, and we see till the very end, Rabbi Eliezer did not change his mind. He did not give in to the rabbinic position, even though they excommunicated him. He stayed true till the end. Right when he died, they had been fighting for however many years. It was the end of his life. Right when he died, Amar Rabbi Yoshua Ragov, Amar Hutar Neder. So Rabbi Yoshua stood up and he says, "We remove the excommunication. Hutar Neder. Remove the excommunication." Motzi Shabbos Pagabo Rabbi Akiva men Kezari. When Shabbos ended, Rabbi Akiva took the coffin all the way from Kezari to Lud, and Hayamaka Bibsaro, and he was striking his flesh. Hayamaka Bibsaro. Rabbi, hold on 1 second. Don is calling me from Israel. I'm just going to tell him it'll be 10 minutes. Hold on. So he said, Hayamaka. So he said, Rabbi Akiva met him, and he took him all the way from Kizari to Lud. Hayamaka Bibsaro. Rabbi Akiva was striking his flesh until he was causing it to bleed. So this was actually a question. You're not allowed to do that for mourning, but Rabbi Akiva wasn't mourning the person; he was mourning the Torah. Pasach of Beshura. So Rabbi Akiva started, and he opened up his mouth when they were mourning, and he said, "Avi Rechav Yisrael Farashav." He says, my father, the Rechav Yisrael, the chariot of Israel, and his horsemen, Harbemos Yeshli. That was the statement that Elisha said about Eliyahu and Navi. He said, "I have a lot of money. I have no money changer to exchange him with." So anyway, he was mourning his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, who he had excommunicated his whole life. So we see from here that Rabbi Akiva didn't learn from Rabbi Yeshua, he learned from Rabbi Eliezer. Amam Rabbi Eliezer Gamra. Where it says Gamrami Rabbi Eliezer, he learned from Rabbi Eliezer v'lo savra, but he didn't understand it. Hadar Gamrami Rabbi Yeshua, then he learned it from Rabbi Yeshua the Asber anyway, and he explained it to him. So the Gemara said, "Well, Heichi Avid, how was Rabbi Eliezer able to do this magic when they were when he was walking with Rabbi Akiva? Didn't we just learn in the Mishnah, whoever makes magic is liable for death?" Gemara says, "L'Islamei Shani." Yeah, he was allowed to teach it. To teach it is permitted. The Amar and to study it and to teach it is permitted. The Amar Mar L'Silmad La'asos. You're not allowed to learn it to do it. La'asos Yata Alamed. You're not allowed to learn magic to do it. But you're allowed to learn it in order to understand it and to teach what's prohibited. So basically, you're allowed to learn it in order to say that this is prohibited. We now completed this chapter, and we start the next chapter, which is called the chapter of Ben Sorer Moreh, the 8th chapter about the rebellious child. Also a very, very famous chapter and a beautiful chapter of the Talmud. Ben Sorer Moreh, this rebellious child who the Torah tells us will be executed. He's stoned to death. At what point does he become this rebellious child? At what point? It's a very small, narrow window. It's until once he brings forth two hairs on his genitalia, and until his beard is full. And the Gemara and the Mishnah says, we're referring to the lower beard around his genitalia, not the upper beard on his face. The rabbis spoke in euphemisms, in clean language, as it says. Why is it only the lower language, the lower beard? As it states, ish ben. When a person will have a son who's rebellious, ben v'abas, it means it only applies to a son and not a daughter. Ben ish, a son and not a man. And a katan pater shelo baruchal mitzvos, and also a minor is going to be exempt because he never comes into the domain of mitzvos. So the Gemara says katan mino, and how do we know that the minor is going to be exempt? How do we know that the minor is going to be exempt from that? That it only applies to a person who's in this range where he's close to the age of an adult. So as it says, he's not in the age of mitzvah. So how are you going to hold him responsible? Where else do we see that a minor is punished? No other circumstance. That we're going to need a verse to say that he's exempt. So the Gemara says, no, this is what we're asking. You think that a rebellious child is killed for his actual sin? Well, his actual sin is minor. He's killed for what we expect him to become. And since we expect him to become terrible, we might have thought nami. Even if he's a minor, we should execute him. And furthermore, ben v'lo ish, katan mashma, but since it says a son and not a man, we might think it applies even to a minor. So Amar Yehuda Amar Amar Kra, therefore it states ish ben, when a man will have a son, which means ben asamachuk v'rasa shalish, a son who's close to the age of a man. That's who the ben Sorer Moreh is. That's who the rebellious child is. So now the Gemara says it said in the Mishnah until his lower beard is encircled. Until the atara is basically the crown around the male member itself and not around the scrotum of the man. He says it's surrounding the gid, which is the member itself, and not the beitzim. So now Rav Chisda teaches us something which the Gemara is going to debate. Katan shaholid ein beno nasa ben Sorer Moreh. He says a minor who fathers a child, that child is not capable of does not fit within the category of a rebellious child, because it says yella ish, when a man will have a son, or ish ben, a man has a son, v'lo with ben, and not when a child has a son. And the Gemara says Hami Bailei could Rav Yehuda, and this teaching is only needed according to Rav Yehuda Amar. So the Gemara says this is only teaching. How can we use this verse? The teacher said, don't we need this to teach us what Rav Yehuda Marav says, to tell us that it applies to a son who's close to a man? Why does it say when a man will have a son? So that teaches us like Rav Chisda. Maybe it's teaching us just like Rav Chisda. No. Im kain neimakra ben ish. Milo ish ben. Why does it say ish ben? Shmamina tarti. But now the Gemara is going to, and with this we'll end the daf. I'll just introduce tomorrow's daf. It says Puigi de Rabba. This teaching of Rav Chisda that a minor is capable of fathering a child argues with Rabba. The Amar Rabba katan eno moed. Rabba says a minor is not capable of fathering a child. It says im ish goel. And is going to prove it. So basically, the Gemara is about to debate, and this will be tomorrow's daf, whether a minor is capable of having a child or not. The minor is capable of producing seed, but whether or not that seed is potent enough to produce a child, that's going to be the discussion of tomorrow's daf. A big shekoach to everybody. Everybody have an amazing day. Yeah, shekoach.
Thank you. Safe travels. Safe.
Shekoach.